Hello, yeah. Right, we got some shit ones, and we got some shit ones. Do you want the shit one first or the shit one first? Because you're getting the shit one. I'm just going to read them. I'm just going to do that. That's what I'm just going to do. Not sure if this is helpful at all, but... ... Whether something is objectively good or objectively bad is in some sense irrelevant to the individual. It is probably... God, I'm so bad at probably. Jesus. It is probably best for your intuition. It is probably best for your intuitions about good and evil to map onto reality, because this will most likely offer the greatest yield of good for you. That is an assumption. Yes, that is an assumption. But if the opposite were true, the following conclusion would still hold. So the assumption is that having your idea of good being in accordance with, the general consensus of what good is and what is actually, whether my theory about the fundamental nature of good and evil things is correct, like symbiosis and positive sum and stuff like that. Anyway, whether that's true or not, I'm right about that or not, to have your definitions of good and evil map onto everybody else's and be in accordance with them is probably better for you than for them not to be, right? And that's the assumption. But even if it wasn't true, this conclusion was still right. Ultimately, whether something is good or bad will only become so once it is filtered through you. So even if something is objectively bad, but for whatever reason you are convinced it is good, and most likely are not aware that it is objectively bad, because then you would be an irrational individual, it is of course still good to you. It might eventually turn out to be bad, but in that moment it's good through you. So, and that could go on. That could last your lifetime. Something could be bad, and you could, through whatever miracle of chance, never find out that it was. You could believe it was good. It could be objectively bad, as objectively as we can get, collectively subjective. And just through a miracle of chance, you could never find out that this thing that you believe so strongly is as good is actually inherently bad. So really, you're just the filter for that. Anyway, so we get egoism finally. Then what? We know we want to maximise our area under the curve, and we know there will be ways, whether we actually know correctly what those ways are or not, to increase the chances of achieving that aim. One of those ways might be to emulate a role model. Now, there are some role models which would of course be better than others. Jesus, whether he was a real human in any way or not. I think it was probably a real guy, but anyway. I don't think there was a person who had magical powers and rose from the dead. Although maybe, back in those days they weren't very good at telling if people were dead or not, so maybe he just had some kind of fucking mini coma. Jesus, whether he was a real human in any way or not, as a documented character, whether he was a real human in any way or not, as a documented character, again fictional or otherwise, is likely a better role model for achieving our aims than Jafar from Aladdin. David Copperfield, Batman, and whatever will be better than the devil. Okay, it's just pointing out the obvious there. There are role models. You can have role models. Some of them will be good. Some of them won't be particularly good. Although I have been advocating utilitarianism as a route to satisfying the fundamental ethical egoism, I think Sam's description of what morality should be is a good not alternative, but in between of the two. Not quite as structured and specific as utilitarianism, but not as all-encompassing and broad as the underlying egoism, which it is also contained within. I am less inclined to sympathise with Sam's almost rejection of Hume's guillotine. I think it is oh god, I'm going to sneeze. I think it is logically something, wherever that is on the page. Hello. I think it is a logically sound assertion, bravo Hume, but I think what makes Sam's approach to morality so good is that it is almost the simplest ought from the simplest is. The simplest is, although I know you can't even get, I know the whole point is that you can't get one, but the closest you can get to getting one from the other, I think, is what I'm getting at here. The simplest is, in fact is the simplest is. What? Anyway, I would argue it is what Descartes famously recognised. I think, therefore I am. The simplest ought, which of course you cannot necessarily get from this, but which should best satisfy our understanding of reason following from this understanding. Jesus Christ, what a fucking sentence. The simplest ought would be, and this is where I do sympathise with Sam a little, that we should behave in accordance with our preferences, in so much as those preferences actually act in our favour. But Sam expands this to be the case for all conscious creatures, which I agree with, because it does not violate the simplest ought. But it is not itself the simplest ought. It is contained within the simplest ought, but does not occupy it totally. Okay, what are we getting at there? Right. So I think you can't get an ought from an is, but certain ises interact with. I think the simplest is that I think therefore I am, and it's not I think you think therefore you are. It's just I think therefore I am. I know Sam and other Buddhist inclined people tend to think, well, the I thing doesn't work, but just forget about it. It's just the conscious. Okay, I am conscious, therefore I am conscious. It's what it is. Or fine, consciousness, therefore consciousness. Whatever. The simplest ought is what that would suggest to you. What that would suggest to be the most obvious Occam's. If you apply Occam's razor to that consciousness thing, and this is where Sam kind of shovels in his little. Maybe you can get an ought from this, because he says we have preferences, and we definitely do. But then you can just ask the question, well, why ought I act in accordance with those preferences? Why not act against them or whatever? You need some kind of ought in there. But I think the simplest ought is that you act in accordance with those preferences, those natural, not natural, but Well, I'm not too happy with that one. We'll leave it there. Something that's occurred to me that might be of use. Oh, this was a really bad one because it actually doesn't work. Something that's occurred to me that might be of use to point out is that in the case of the parents who supposedly don't act in their self-interest by behaving selflessly by raising their child, there may be a way to show how they are in fact behaving in their self-interest, aside from common sense. If we imagine whatever effects the introduction of a child has on these parents that we are considering to be not in their immediate self-interest, let's assume, even though I despise this as a measure, the money it takes to raise the child, and also the time investment, the mental stress, the impact on their social life, etc. If we let's assume that they were the factors that people are saying clearly make it not in a person's self-interest to raise a child, whatever. If we then remove the child from the equation and imagine these same hindrances being placed on them for no reason, it should highlight the pretty obvious difference, does it not? The presence of the child negates these reprimands, and if it did not, why would anyone be right to put up with these same impingements, unless there was some equally compelling redeeming reward? Okay, that was a really terrible one, but. So the point is, why would anyone do that unless it wasn't in their self-interest, or they believed it to be in self-interest, and they could be wrong, of course. Why would anyone put up with those impingements on their self-interest unless they believed it to actually be in self-interest? Oh, never mind. But it was pretty bad. Bad example. So acknowledging that the implementation of an ethical egoistic mindset, especially in individual circumstances, can be difficult, I believe it can be useful to follow some simple rules, which are undoubtedly not perfect, but put you in good stead and try to reduce the likelihood that you will be acting against your actual self-interest. First of all, I think my ideas for the fundamental factors of good are useful in this regard, and do, in fact, lend themselves to varied individual circumstances. Try to act in a way which seems to be the most totally symbiotic. Now again, this is always going to be more complex a problem than you can possibly imagine, but using your best judgment will likely be better than acting in opposition to this or not to attempt it at all. Secondly, try to instigate or find positive-sum games for much the same reason. Following from this, try to remember the exponential benefits of social relationships, especially healthy ones. I also think that Sam Harris's basis for morality is fairly straightforward, and being conscious that you are trying to move as far away from the worst possible suffering for all conscious creatures can be useful if you don't find it too pessimistic. Finally, some simpler rules, typically the realm of religion, but now given reason beyond being told to do them. Things such as, typically the realm of religion, but now having been given reason beyond being told to do them. Things such as don't lie if you can avoid doing so, also closely linked to Sam, and don't murder, don't steal, and all the rest of them. So yeah, just those little simple rules, just they kind of just tell you what's going to work out better for you. Probabilistically. If you still cannot get your head around ethical egoism as a concept, or why it should be taken seriously, just play the childish why game with yourself. Take any proposition, in this case a moral one, and ask yourself why until you can no more. So it's just like, don't steal. Someone says why, and then they say, well, actually, a lot of people will just go, because it's bad. But if you actually try to answer the question, okay, well, actually, let's stick with that really childish answer of it's bad. Okay, why is it bad? Because it's the people you're stealing from won't like it, or whatever the childish response would be. And okay, why wouldn't they like it? And why should you not do it because of that? If you just play it long enough, eventually you'll find that it's because it's not best for you to do it. Back on doing what you want to want, or secondary desires, or whatever. When someone wants to kill themselves, it's highly unlikely that they want to kill themselves. Discuss. Okay, right. I'm glad that's over. Bye now.